Spain is in the World Cup final. They beat France 2-0 yesterday in Dallas. Mbappé had the fewest touches of any player on the pitch, and left with a yellow card but without a goal, and France's expected goals total of 0.26 tells you how thoroughly Spain controlled the match. At 3 p.m. Eastern this afternoon in Atlanta, England faces Argentina for the other spot in the final in one of the most historically charged fixtures in the sport's history. Separately, ICE has been ordered to stop conducting vehicle stops in the United States after 2 deadly shootings in Texas and Maine, one of which, in Maine on Monday, killed a driver, with the agency saying its officer was fearing for public safety. And the United States has imposed a 21-day quarantine requirement on Americans returning from the Democratic Republic of Congo, as Ebola spreads to new areas. Let's get into all three. Start with yesterday's match, because the manner of Spain's victory deserves more analysis than the scoreline alone suggests.
France entered the match as the better-ranked team on paper, and as the side that had played 6 matches without once needing extra time. Spain had needed extra time against none of their opponents either.
What the 90 minutes in Dallas produced was not a close match that ended 2-0. It was a match in which France created almost nothing. Their expected goals figure, the probabilistic measure of scoring chances, was 0.26. For context, a penalty kick alone carries an XG of approximately 0.79. With all their attacking talent, and with Kylian Mbappé in the starting lineup, created in 90 minutes of a World Cup semifinal less than a third of what a single penalty represents in scoring probability. Spain scored first in the 22nd minute through a penalty. Lamine Yamal, who turned 17 years old on Sunday, the day before the match, drew the foul on Lucas Digne. Mikel Oyarzabal converted. Spain's second came in the 58th minute through Pedro Porro, the right back, whose goal came from a give-and-go combination with Dani Olmo, not from Spain's primary attacking stars, but from their defensive infrastructure operating as an attacking unit. That is the kind of goal a team scores when the system is functioning better than any individual within it. The player who entered the match, leading the Golden Boot standings with 8 goals, and with an injured ankle that his entire country spent 4 days worrying about, received a yellow card for fouling Spanish goalkeeper Unai Simón. He had, per multiple match reports, the fewest touches of any player on the pitch. That sentence should be read slowly. The most individually talented player remaining in the tournament, the player whose fitness dominated French football discourse for a week, was so thoroughly managed by Spain's defensive structure that the match's statistical tracking noted him as the least active player on the field in terms of ball contact. This is the kind of outcome that changes the narrative of a tournament. Spain's route to the final has now produced 6 wins, conceding goals in only 1 match, beating Portugal, Belgium, Morocco, and France. Between them, the nations that contested the previous 3 World Cup finals. They face either England or Argentina on July 19th at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. That final will be their first World Cup championship match since 2010, when they beat the Netherlands 1-0 in extra time to win their only title. The match this afternoon in Atlanta is the other story. England and Argentina at a World Cup semi-final is the kind of fixture the sport produces once per generation and talks about for the next one. Jude Bellingham, who has scored in both of England's knockout matches, faces a Lionel Messi, who did not score against Switzerland, but assisted the first goal and was the creative center of everything Argentina did well. England have not won a World Cup since 1966. Argentina won theirs in 1978, 1986, and 2022. The pedigree runs in one direction. The current form over 6 matches in this tournament runs somewhat more evenly. Whatever happens at 3 p.m. Eastern, the result will be discussed for longer than this tournament lasts.
Now ice, because 2 deaths and a documented pattern of serious injuries require more space than a single news cycle.
An ICE agent in Maine shot and killed a man during an enforcement operation. CBS News confirmed the killing. The ICE agency's response, per CBS News' reporting, was to say that the officer was fearing for public safety. That is the agency's stated justification. And it is, at this point, the only justification that has been publicly offered for why a man in Maine is dead after an encounter with a federal immigration enforcement officer. Following that killing, and following what reporting describes as a separate deadly shooting involving ICE in Texas, ICE has been ordered to temporarily stop conducting vehicle stops, according to reporting cited in Tug Button's curated headlines on July 15th. 2 deaths from vehicle stop encounters in 2 states. In what appears to be a short span of time, forced a temporary operational pause in one of the agency's most common enforcement tools. A vehicle stop is exactly what it sounds like. An agent stops a vehicle, identifies the occupants, and determines whether any immigration enforcement action is appropriate. It is also, by design, a confrontational interaction conducted by armed federal officers. I want to say something carefully about the Maine killing, because the details publicly available are thin, and I will not speculate about what they don't cover. What is confirmed is, a man is dead. An ICE agent fired the shot. The agency said the officer was fearing for public safety. That formulation, fearing for public safety, rather than the officer's own safety, is an unusual construction that suggests the stated justification is about protecting others, rather than self-defense. Beyond that, the documented public record, as of this writing, does not contain further confirmed details about what the man was doing or why the encounter escalated to lethal force. What provides important context for both killings is a separate report, also confirmed in today's coverage, about what has been happening during ICE enforcement operations over a longer period. According to a report cited in Tug Button's curated headlines, citing doctors and human rights experts, crowd control weapons used against ICE protesters caused blindings and traumatic brain injuries across hundreds of documented incidents between June 2025 and May 2026. The report's authors say the true number of incidents is far greater than what they were able to document. Blindings, traumatic brain injuries, from crowd control weapons used against people who were protesting. I have been covering ICE's expanding enforcement footprint throughout this month. I covered the ICE facial recognition app, distributed to local police, confirmed by DHS's own paperwork to scan U.S. citizens before anyone verifies their status, with all images retained for 15 years. I covered the letter from the former acting ICE director to Congress, acknowledging the agency maintains records on people who were never arrested. I covered the phone call to a woman's spouse from a blocked number, threatening that her wife, a pediatric occupational therapist who stood 10 feet away from federal agents, would be added to a domestic terrorist watch list. Now, within the same month, a man killed in Maine during a vehicle stop, a second deadly shooting in Texas, a federal order to pause vehicle stops, and a documented report of hundreds of incidents of crowd control weapons causing permanent injuries to protesters. These are not separate stories. They are the same story in different forms. An agency with expanding authority, reduced oversight, and an operational mandate from the current administration to maximize enforcement encounters is producing a pattern of outcomes, injuries, deaths. Surveillance of civilians that the administration's own choices to temporarily pause vehicle stops now implicitly acknowledge as requiring some form of course correction. A pause, not a reckoning. A pause. And now public health. Because a 21-day travel requirement is a serious measure that the United States does not impose casually. CBS News confirmed on July 14th that the United States has instructed American citizens who have been traveling in the Democratic Republic of Congo to spend 21 days outside the country before they can re-enter the United States. The reason? Concerns about Ebola spreading to new areas of the DRC, with a surge in cases confirmed, but the source still under investigation by federal health authorities. The 21-day figure is specific and meaningful. The maximum incubation period for the Ebola virus, the longest an infected person can carry the virus before showing symptoms, is 21 days. A 21-day quarantine period in a third country before U.S. re-entry is designed to ensure that any traveler who might have been exposed while in the DRC would show symptoms and could be identified and isolated before entering the American population. This is standard Ebola containment protocol. The fact that the U.S. has activated it means federal health authorities believe exposure risk in the DRC is sufficiently high that standard screening at a U.S. port of entry, a questionnaire, a temperature check, a brief conversation, is not enough. The Democratic Republic of Congo has experienced recurring Ebola outbreaks since the virus was first identified there in 1976. The country has had more Ebola outbreaks than any other nation. The pattern of recurrence reflects structural conditions: dense forest habitat that allows the virus to persist in animal reservoirs, limited healthcare infrastructure in remote regions where outbreaks typically originate, conflict-affected areas where healthcare workers cannot safely operate, and community distrust of outsiders that can slow response and tracing. These conditions have not changed substantially despite the best efforts of successive international health responses. What has changed in recent years, and what provides relevant context for this particular escalation, is the state of the global health infrastructure that responds to outbreaks like this. USAID's global health programs have been significantly reduced under the current administration, with multiple offices closed and international staffing cut back. CDC's global disease detection and response programs have faced budget pressures. The WHO, which coordinates the international response to outbreak notifications, has been told by the U.S. it is being evaluated for continued membership. I am not in a position to establish a direct causal link between those reductions and this specific Ebola flare-up in the DRC. What I can say is that the 21-day travel restriction means the U.S. government believes the current containment of this outbreak is not adequate to prevent introduction of the virus via returning travelers, and that it chose to announce a travel restriction rather than announce the additional global health investment would address the containment gap more directly. One of those options is much cheaper. One of them actually solves the problem. The irony that functions most clearly here is timing. The 21-day restriction requires Americans who are in the DRC to spend 3 weeks in a third country before coming home. That requirement is an enormous disruption for anyone: researchers, aid workers, journalists, business travelers, citizens visiting family who happens to be in the DRC right now. It is a blunt instrument. It is also, given the incubation period, the scientifically correct blunt instrument for this particular virus. The question is whether a government that is imposing a 21-day external quarantine requirement is simultaneously doing enough in the DRC itself to reduce the conditions that create the need for that quarantine in the first place. Spain is in the World Cup final after systematically dismantling France in a match where the world's best attacker touched the ball less than anyone else on the pitch. ICE has been ordered to pause vehicle stops after a man was killed in Maine and another person in Texas. In the same month, a documented report cataloged hundreds of incidents of protesters being blinded and sustaining traumatic brain injuries from crowd control weapons used at ICE operations. And Ebola in the DRC has reached the level where Americans returning from that country must spend 3 weeks in a third country before they can come home. A 21-day response that is scientifically justified and simultaneously a symptom of a global health containment gap that nobody is actively closing. At 3 p.m. Eastern in Atlanta, England plays Argentina for the right to face Spain in New Jersey on Saturday. The World Cup final will be Spain against either the country that hasn't won it since 1966, or the country that won it 3 times and whose greatest player turns 39 years old before the final whistle. That's a match worth watching. The other stories are happening whether you're watching or not.